Hello, and welcome to Israel in the time of COVID. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Deborah Silverman, and I am so excited to welcome you to our program this evening. Tonight, we are joined by Dr. Oded and Mrs. Zohar Volovelsky. Zohar is a human resource specialist at JDC in Israel and was previously a leadership development program manager at the Cincinnati Jewish Federation. Dr. Oded Volovelsky is the head of the Pediatric Nephrology Clinical Unit and Research Lab at Hadassah Hebrew University Medical Center in Jerusalem. They lived in Cincinnati from 2014 to 2017 during Oded's fellowship at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and had a strong personal and professional connection with the Cincinnati Jewish community. We are so fortunate to have them with us tonight. Welcome, Oded and Zohar. We are also joined by Dr. Adi and Mr. Lior Zaref, who are currently living in the Cincinnati Jewish community with their 3 children and have lived here for the past 2 years. Adi is an adult physician who is currently doing a postdoc fellowship at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Lior is an educational leader, musician, and was a former high school principal in Tel Aviv. Welcome, Adi and Lior. Thank you all for joining us tonight. If you have any questions during the program, please enter them in the Q&A chat, and one of our speakers will answer them during our question and answer portion of the evening. And now I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Oded and Mrs. Zohar Volovelsky and Dr. Adi and Mr. Lior Zaref.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you, and we are honored to be with you today to celebrate Israel's Independence Day with a talk about COVID in Israel. So today we are going to discuss the Israeli experience with COVID and specifically the medical and social aspects of the pandemic.
So they met in Waco, Texas, as instructors in the Jewish Reform Movement's summer camp. Their family misses eating Dewey's pizza, Grater's raspberry and chocolate ice cream, and watching the Reds play, of course.
Oded is a physician scientist, the head of the pediatric nephrology department in Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. He's investigating the developmental biology of the kidney, and Zohar was working for the Jewish Agency for many years, building leadership in the Federation. Today she's working at the JDC, and as you heard, they lived in Cincinnati for 3 years, and they were very much involved in our wonderful community here.
They're already saying that I miss you, Zohar.
It's great to be over here, and it's great to see that there is a next generation that shows the connection between the Jewish community and the Jewish Federation and the Israeli community and Cincinnati Children's, when Adi and I both have the privilege to work in.
Yes, definitely. So we want to thank the community for having us. We're all very privileged to get this wonderful training and experience. So Oded, let's start with you. So where were you when the COVID started?
Actually, when COVID, we heard the rumors about the COVID-19. I was in Eilat. In Eilat, there is a scientific conference, very big one, that takes place once every 3 years, and all the biologists from all over Israel come over there. And we heard the rumors, and there were tons of virologists around us, and we asked them what's going on. So it was in February, and everyone said this is just nonsense, and this is rumors, and we don't need to get in panic. Nothing will happen in Israel. And we learned that we need to be much more modest about our medical expectation about the future and how we can predict what's going on. Zohar?
Yeah, it was, it met me working very, very hard. Just one day out of the blue, we started, everything stopped here, really everything stopped. I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I started working from home, worked from home actually from my living room, which you can see now, for about a year. Most of the time with the kids with me. What a challenge.
Yeah, and we heard rumors in Israel And the first cases in Israel began after there were some Israeli tourists in a ferry in Japan. And we heard about it, and Israel sent a special delegation to Japan to see what's going on with these Israelis that got this weird virus. And then there was a decision of Israel to bring them into Israel to a special section in Tel HaShomer Hospital in Ramat Gan. And there was kind of everyone didn't know what's going on. And then these patients were called number 1 and number 2, and then they began to number these patients. And every day in the news we heard about patient number 5 that was in the mall in Jerusalem, and everyone was in the mall in Jerusalem was stressed. And I think that what changed what's going on is there was a tourist group from South Korea that was all around Israel, and they found that all of them had almost COVID-19, and then it begins to move forward very fast, and it was very difficult to stop.
Yeah, so they really each patient was highlighted in the news every day, right? And
Right.
and there was
and everybody that met some didn't even meet. I mean, they had they published the list of everything they did. And if you were in the same place, in the same mall, you had to stay at home for weeks, just in case you got the disease as well. It was very
they
scary.
monitored everyone, and each patient was a movie star for a day in the news.
Yes, exactly.
And then there was the transformation from denial to panic, right? With the rumors from Italy, right?
Right. Yeah, I have a lot of colleagues from Italy, and because we belong to the European Union and to the European Medical Association, and there were a lot of rumors about all these. I think you showed it before, the coffins, and there were a lot of, especially in North Italy, there were a lot of dead people, and we heard very stressful announcement from our friends: get ready, you don't know what's going to happen. And then there was really a panic in Israel, kind of. The government decided to close almost everything. It was like in a war time in Israel. There was a very stress about getting food, and for example, all the eggs for some reason, all the toilet paper disappeared from the groceries, and it was really like kind of a panic, and no one knew what's going to happen. And the response of the Israeli leadership was to close the country very, very early. And I think that it was kind of even earlier than the rest of Europe to close it and to try let everyone stay at home, not moving more than a few meters out of their homes. There was really a panic kind of in Israel.
Mm-hmm. And how is, as a physician, what's the experience of being in a hospital in that time? Were the special measures being taken by the Israeli hospitals?
Yes, so I think that the medical system in Israel behaves very well in general. So in the beginning, there was a lot of stress about that there will not be enough ventilators in Israel. So everyone get ready, and at least at Hadassah, in Hadassah we have the highest number of cases because there are a lot of cases in Jerusalem area. So we transformed all of our internal medicine department into a COVID-19 department. There are some times that there are about 300, 200 patients in the hospital just with COVID-19. And so we kind of made it up throughout what's going on. And there was a lot of stress in the beginning. For example, they didn't allow guests to come into these departments. And this is for Israeli, as you know, we are very social person. It was very difficult, and really people really suffered a lot from loneliness. For example, and there are a lot of projects, a lot of social projects to try to help it. For example, a student of mine made a national project to bring iPads to these patients, that all patients that they can communicate with their families. And for example, Israel bought a lot of ventilators, as I said, and a lot of companies, Israeli companies, begin to make up a lot of very simple, cheap ventilators that actually will help us in the future. Um, and that's it. And also there was kind of a, a beginning of preparation of using the public system of Kupat Cholim and the army that we will talk about it, I guess, later. And I can see that, for example, in the university, when we need to have all these PCR tests for COVID-19, and we wanted to do it very quickly, so all the labs contribute their PCR machines into the hospital to have these PCR tests. And I think that in general, the hospital behaved very, very well in the at least in the first steps.
And they created new units, right? Like field
Right. It
units.
was you saw a lot of reconstruction in the hospital. It was like you saw construction everywhere because you wanted to make like rooms for isolated rooms and all these preparation, and to have cameras in each room to communicate with them. It was like and it was difficult because, for example, in our hospital, when it's a non-profit organization, we had to continue with the regular activity, otherwise we would have an economic collapse. It was kind of a struggle between how to continue the daily activity while what will happen. And everyone was really afraid what will happen with the flu season will start, and what didn't happen eventually. And there was but yeah, we just the hospital was changed in a moment.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the lockdowns. Okay, so actually, our experience here in Cincinnati is that even with the restrictions and the lockdowns, they maintained the freedom of movement, and the enforcement was based on truth.
And trust.
Trust.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, how was the Israeli experience with all these issues of the enforcement and the freedom of movement?
So it was very in times, not the whole time, but in times it was very, very strict. Like I said, I, for example, and many others, just one day started working from home. From switching from 5 days a week in the office to 24/7 at home. Also with the kids most of the time, and you in sometimes you just couldn't, especially around the holidays, Passover and the high holidays, because in Israel a lot of people celebrate and eat together, many people. So it was very, very strict. You couldn't go. You had Oded, for example, had a special sign on his car which has a medical doctor on duty. That's the only way he could move from one place to another. You can also only go, everything was closed, everything was shut down, except just basic things you need to buy, grocery and pharmaceutical stuff like this. Everything else was shut down, which was very, very hard, and also, as you can imagine, very difficult for the economy. We got in the highest number, we got to about 18% unemployment because of this situation, which is like 1 million people out of 8 million Israelis. So it was really difficult times, and they shut down all the schools. Of course, really, we was country shut, like almost the whole country was shut down except for the hospitals.
There was I remember there was an issue with the special secret services, right? That followed people. Can you explain about that?
Israel began to, this was kind of almost concern for democracy, that Israel began to have new rules about how to identify patients that are not there at home, or people that were exposed to COVID-19 patients. So there was a kind of urgent law that the Israeli government can identify based on your mobile phone number where you are, and if you are a patient, they can identify that you are out of your home, and if you are exposed to a patient, they can send you a message and order to stay at home because they noticed that you were next to another patient based on your location in a specific time, which was
That's
kind of
crazy.
overwhelming. I think it will never happen in the US, but the Israeli intelligence there was kind of tension about it because no one wants to know that the big brother knows where we are, although it's true everywhere. I can tell you.
I wonder if it's because of the size of the US, or it's
No, I
the,
think that the
the
freedom value
freedom
is
of.
very important and the personal rights are very important in the US compared to the Israel, that is also very important, but I think that everyone in Israel understands that security and the safety of the people is higher than everything. I think we are used to it because of all the security problems we have and terror, that it's fine that sometime your civil rights will be damaged, I guess. I can just say a personal story that I had a patient that we had resuscitation at 4 a.m. in the morning, and for some reason it's not really important why, but the police had my car number that I need to stay at home because I was exposed to a patient, and the police stopped me in the middle of the road at 4 a.m. and didn't let me go on to go to
Wow.
my because they identify that I'm not where I need to be. I think I think you didn't notice stuff like this in the US, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Wow.
and if you were in quarantine, you had to stay at home. The police would actually come and check that you stay at home. And when we actually had a few times where we were in quarantine because every time you just next to somebody that is sick, you have to stay at home. And also when you didn't have to stay at home, but when we had quarantine on the entire country, there were rules like you can go out just 100 meters or something like this. Everybody, unless you have to take your dog. So everybody started buying dogs so they can walk with them
Or sports.
further.
Everyone wore
Yeah, of course, everybody started doing sports. Yeah.
sportswear went really high. Yeah.
Elise
Yes.
and Holly, we can see your questions. We will answer it in a few minutes.
And Julia had a comment, right? We will address the questions according to the topics, and if or else in the end of the conversation. And Julia Weinstein just made a comment that that it's an interesting discussion, and the good of all is ultimately important. So there's a tension between rights, obviously, and it's very hard to decide. And I guess it's different between a country that is more of an island country like Israel or a country that is open like in the US. So I guess also.
I think you can imagine it like, I don't compare it like to September 11, that there were a lot of new rules that damaged the privacy of the people at the same time. And I cannot compare it, but it was kind of the same feeling that we need to behave differently.
So actually, Israel is a kind of an island country that not surrounded by any people that can enter because it's all enemies surrounding.
Semi.
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah. Semi-enemies and enemies. However, it's supposed to be much easier to protect this kind of land because there is just one enter. That's the Ben Gurion airport. So can you tell us a little bit about the closing of the entrance to Israel, the one entrance?
So?
Okay, yeah, there was all the time a big discussion. They still keep changing the rules all the time. At a certain point, most of the time, you just could not go to Israel. Under certain restrictions, you could, but then you have to stay in quarantine for 2 weeks before they will release you into the country. There was a few regulations. I mean, for example, they stopped, they closed the entrance from the US later than the rest of the world. I guess, I don't know, political reasons, or they just didn't want to, we value very, very highly the connection we have with the United States, so we didn't want to damage it. And also, one of the countries that were reopened so we can go, Israelis can go, was some of the countries where we had recently had peace agreement with. So it was a lot of, people. A lot of people did. Yeah, for example, for Dubai. Many Israelis went there, which was like almost the only place where you could go. You need to understand that for us Israelis, maybe that's the most difficult part of being in quarantine, that we can't travel. I mean, those of us who knows us, we traveled when we were in the States, we traveled all the time. This is part of being Israelis, to travel all the time. Very hard for us. More than a year not to travel. So everybody that could go went to Dubai, for example, which, it was an issue. Like people said, it was a political decision and not maybe the smartest one.
There was the Dubai festival, right? That it was like everywhere in the news. Everyone were talking about Dubai and the hotels, and suddenly like an euphoric atmosphere, right? After the lockdown, that we can go everywhere, and then the reality struck, right? Because there was a new mutation coming from Dubai, right?
Exactly, a new mutation coming from there. It was beginning of one of the peaks that we had in the disease that brought another lockdown. We had a total of 3 lockdowns for a few weeks each time. So one of them came after this whole Dubai festival. Well, it wasn't the only reason, but
I'm not sure that everyone understands exactly what happened with Dubai. So I'll just make it clear that there was a new peace process with the Emirates, with Dubai, and the politicians wanted to highlight it and show
achievement.
This achievement, and they opened the border just to go to Dubai, and the hilarious thing was that everything was closed in Israel. Everything, like the stores, the restaurants, everything, but you could go to Dubai and do whatever you want there, and then come back to Israel like nothing happened. So all the,
and it was a green country, right?
Yeah,
it was like you could go in without quarantine.
And many singers and a lot of performance of Israelis in Dubai to Israelis, but that was allowed.
Right.
So it was really,
and I think that retrospectively, this was the biggest mistake of Israel, that we didn't use our advantage as New Zealand and Taiwan as being an island, as you mentioned, non-physically, but kind of an island. We didn't use it because of political pressures of our relationship with the US and the new relationship with the Emirates. And this was the main income was from these countries to Israel, and also Turkey for some time. And I think that retrospective, just after a year, they made the people to have PCR tests before they go into Israel, or not. In the beginning, Israel built kind of hotels for all the tourists who came to Israel, and let them stay over there for 2 weeks. It was a big mess in the beginning, and I think this was the biggest mistake of Israel in this occasion. I mean, in controlling the pandemic, there were more mistakes, many more mistakes, but in controlling the pandemic, we didn't use our advantage like the great Prime Minister of New Zealand, for example.
Maybe we will talk a little bit about.
Maybe Zohar can tell us more about the education system in Israel, because again, our experience from Cincinnati was that when the pandemic started, so everything was shut down, and actually we didn't have a regular school last year. We were only in remote learning, but they were so well prepared this year, and especially at Rockwell, if I may say here, that this year the kids went to school almost regularly. Like almost,
except of the masks, I think everything is totally regular.
Okay. So it's very far. The situation is very different here. Like I said before, almost for actually more than a year, most kids didn't go to school. Hardly, sometimes like for a few days, and then they shut it back again. Mainly for some, like the fifth grade till like 12th, not like 10th grade, they suffered the most. They did learn from home with Zoom, you know, like everybody else, but I have to say it wasn't the best education, and not, I mean, it was a bit disappointing how the education system in Israel functioned at this time. I personally, like Oded and I were the main teachers of our kids for the last year. Actually, next week, like this Sunday, we have school on Sunday. So this Sunday, it's like the first day since the beginning of like March or something last year that the schools are going, like all the schools are going to reopen for like regular schedule, like all the days. This is for the first time. It's like 1 year and more than 1 year. So you can imagine it was really difficult. Everybody had to stay and work from home with the kids, tutor them because the Zoom didn't do the good enough job. The younger kids did go to school for sometimes, not all the time. The younger kids, the first and second grade, but they were in capsules, like, you know, they separated them. Schools in Israel are about, unlike Rockborn, about 30, 35 kids at a class. So they split them to like 2 free groups. A lot of restrictions. I'm sure we will see the results of this very difficult year with schools in Israel for a long time.
You can see here
there was a lot of dropouts, a lot of kids, it wasn't for them. They studying in remote, and there was about you can actually see the results of very, very high rates in school dropouts, a lot of much more usage of drugs and alcohol, and a lot of domestic violence. About 3 times more domestic violence at home in the last year, because everybody was stuck at home together. So yeah, it was, you know, it's like I said, always the struggle where in one hand you want to save as many lives as you can, which is very, very, very important. I'm not saying it's not. It's maybe the most important, not maybe, it's the most important thing. On the other hand, you pay very high price on the other. In many, many ways, social and economic ways, you pay very high prices.
Thank you. We can see here in this photo a yeshiva learning, and how they try to separate the students there. And we will talk a little bit more about this kind of learning, Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, in a few minutes. So let's go to economic disparity.
So as Zohar was mentioning, that's the other side, right? The price that we had to pay for all these lockdowns with the high unemployment. And actually we had also a question regarding this topic that maybe you can address. So Holly Wolfson asked if the employment support, was there unemployment support for people that lost jobs, and did businesses receive government support when required to close? Very good question.
So actually there was a lot of support. So like I said before, the unemployment rate traditionally the unemployment rate in Israel is very low. It's about 3.2.5%. That was before the pandemic, and it rised up about 5 times. It's so like about 18%, which is, like I said, 1 million out of 8 people in Israel lost their jobs, or most of them didn't actually lost their jobs. They were sent to what we call like an unpaid leave for a long time. Usually for unpaid leave, if you are like before Corona, you had to wait a few months so you could get unemployment like payment.
Yeah.
But now actually what the government did was they started giving them salary for not the whole salary, about 70% from the first day, which was a big change. And also at a certain point, they promised everybody that was on an unpaid or unpaid leave or lost their jobs that they will give them salary until July of this year, like 1-2 months from now. Which is actually, I mean, in one hand, it really helped people to stay, with their head above the water, but on the other hand, it really damaged the economic situation in Israel. For example, now everything is very, very different. Now, since we'll talk about it later, but we have a lot of people vaccinated, so everything is almost back to normal. So, but people still don't want to go back to work because they're getting paid without working. So it's like very hard actually to find people who are willing to do the basic jobs of like waitressing and stuff like this because they're getting paid anyway. So
why was the protest that we can see here in the photo?
That's the other part of Holly's question.
Yeah, exactly. The biggest problem was with the people who are not being like I forgot the word, independent.
That had business that were
the small businesses, the independent. They don't get the unemployment salary. So this is a big problem because a lot of them struggled a lot, as you can imagine, when the whole country is being shut down, all the stores, all the restaurants, everything. So many of them were shut down, and they didn't get as much help as the other people who had regular jobs, like working for factories and organizations and stuff like this.
The signs are.
Problem was with them. That's actually the photo we see here. It's like we are out of air. We lost our hope. Please help us. It's a financial war. And like I said about the education, I'm sure also in this area we will see there is everything. It will stay with us. This economic for situation for a long time, I'm sure.
I think there was a 30% of unemployment, right?
No, much more. She said.
What? Right. Sorry, I didn't hear it.
How much percent was the unemployment?
Around 20.
At the top, it was at the peak. It was about 18%. Which is very high for Israel. But but after being said that, like the overall financial situation in Israel is not that bad actually. The GPD, or however you call it, is actually very high. Not high, but it didn't suffer too much. The government also gave, which was also a controversial decision, but the government also gave twice just money for all the families, about 750 shekels for each person. It doesn't matter if you lost your job, if you suffered from the economic, from the coronavirus or not in an economical way, doesn't matter. They just gave it to everybody. So it did brought money into the system, but it was, like I said, another controversial decision they made. And you need to remember that just the last year we had twice had elections in Israel.
We'll get to
Yeah.
it in a
We'll
Yeah,
get to
so
it in a minute. But
we'll talk
first,
about it later.
one more controversial issue in the Israeli society is the ultra-Orthodox society. And this is a very controversial photo of a funeral of one of the big rabbis in Bnei Brak city. And what can you tell as a society, like as a citizen in Israel, about your feelings towards the I don't know how to define it, like the
like the I would say like the right the right to do religious ceremonies or to follow your religious beliefs, right? And by the way, the photo, maybe you can comment on that as well, because while Zohar said that she had to work with her children at home, right? So we saw that a lot of schools from this community were open throughout the lockdowns, right?
So it's very complicated because it's very easy to be mad at them because this is in the middle of the pandemic, and really there was a very very high percentages of Orthodox people getting sick. But when you look at the situation deeper than that, it's complicated because they have really really large families. They live in very very small houses. It's very very hard for them, like to stay home all the time with 10 kids studying from home. They don't have computers for everyone. They don't even use. A lot of them don't even use computers and internet. The rabbis at the beginning gave lectures with using a phone, like an old phone, and also they were taking away the two most important things for them, which is education. Going to the their own schools, and also maybe the most important, to go to the synagogue. It was taken away. They weren't allowed to do that. So it was very very hard for them, and they at certain point, some of them, it's hard to talk about. It's a big population. It's hard to talk about all of them in one sentence, but in one meaning. But a lot of them just stop, doing what they were told to, because they just, there was there was a lot of them, going just out of the religion, like going, they didn't have schools, they didn't have synagogues, so just went around and just, we one day, Oded and I went to the beach in Tel Aviv one day, and we saw so many Orthodox people there, which you don't usually see because they don't have any other things to do. So they were exposed to things that their community didn't want them to be exposed to. So it was and also the unemployment rate over there was much higher than the rest of the community. So it was, like I said, we were upset with those pictures, of course, but also when you really think about it, their situation is harder than our situation.
Yeah.
Oded?
Well, I think I don't know
although you
I think there was the tension between the liberal side of the population that really obeyed the law, but on the other hand, there was this huge protest against Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, that the Supreme Court approved that the protest is more important than the keeping the regulations of the pandemic, that you can go and protest against the regulation. And on the other hand, so you can see the ultra-Orthodox Jews, that for them, of course, going to synagogue or learning in yeshiva is much more important than the freedom of speech or protest. and they say, how can you decide that this is more important? You decide it based on your liberal point of view. And this is, I guess, sum up the tension in Israel always between being a Jewish and democratic state.
Yeah, and
One more interesting thing to say about the situation actually is that when the situation in the ultra Orthodox neighborhood was really bad, and there was a lockdown, and they couldn't afford buying things and go out. So actually, the army went into position, and the army went and gave food for families in the ultra Orthodox families, which is actually maybe the first time they actually saw soldiers, because most of them don't serve in the military. So it was very interesting and very heartwarming. They received them very, very well. So
yeah,
it showed the strength of the Israeli society, I think.
yes. And so, Oded, you mentioned that there was a lot of tension because though everyone were locked down, there was this two population that were insisting to be
Gathering.
to get together in large amounts, right? In one hand, the ultra Orthodox for their belief that they have to pray, and in the other hand, the liberal that were against the acts of the government and Bibi Netanyahu. And each week, for how many months?
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
Yeah, then they went like thousands of people, right, to
And
the
on bridges everywhere, yeah, and
yeah.
all the highways, on
Yeah.
every bridge you had protests. And we need to remember that, as Zohar said, in the last 2 years we had 4 elections, and we don't have a functioning government.
Still.
Actually, we don't have even a budget in the last 2 or 3 years. So actually, all the office, the ministries, they use the budget from 2 or 3 years ago, and this is and because Benjamin Netanyahu is, as everyone knows, is actually now in court, trying to defend himself. There was a lot of tension, and there was kind of mistrust that actually the government does some measurements. For example, in order to protect the government itself from Benjamin Netanyahu in court. For example, every time when there was a close up, everyone said, "Oh, actually, it's because there is a court in the meeting in a week or two, so he doesn't want it to happen," and all kind of stuff. So it was for the left side of the map, political map, everyone was kind of suspicious about every step that the government did.
Yeah, a big problem of trust.
Yeah.
Unlike
And
New Zealand, you mentioned, right?
right, and you can also take the Arab population that was also, as always, not really trusting the government, and the other time are suspicious. So we have, as always, we have Salat in Israel of a lot of different population with a lot of tensions, and but it's really nice that, as we will talk about it in a moment, maybe, that in the bottom line, surprisingly, it works out. Yeah.
So this is a very sensitive issue, all the politics against the medical issues. And Zohar mentioned before the IDF, and I think that okay, so just a second. So the IDF entered in some point to help, right? It was also a political issue, but we won't get into it because people thought that the IDF supposed to enter in the beginning because there was a special unit that were planned to work with these kind of things. But since we don't have much time, just please tell us a little bit about how the IDF helped with this pandemic.
So I
Go
will
ahead
do
with
it
it.
briefly. I think we don't have a lot of time. So briefly, as you said, because of political reasons, the IDF and the public's health system began to act a bit too late. And army, as you know, it's very organized to work in crisis. So the army did several stuff. The main stuff, he opened his own labs for PCR of COVID-19, and he had a special service that like drives through everywhere, that everyone can come whenever they want to do a COVID-19 test without any referral or without, of course, without paying. And this was very helpful for me as well, actually. But it still was very scary to come with, as you know, my kids over there, to come with a car, to see a lot of soldiers that come with masks, and it really reminded me kind of the Gulf War in the 90s. And also the army was in charge of these hotels that we said. He took a lot of hotels that were empty and took them for to help isolating population like tourists or other population, and also he helped population that is not used to work with like the ultra orthodox, supply them food and everything. But there is always the tension between army and specific populations in Israel.
So maybe the last issue will be the
Vaccination.
vaccinations, yeah, the vaccines. So can you tell us the American population here a little bit about this kind of health maintenance organizations in Israel?
Why did it
Because
work so well in Israel?
It's really different from the States.
This is kind of like the good end, is that Israel has really, as one worked in the US and Israel has a very, very good outpatient public medical system. Israel focused more actually in outpatient than in the hospitals, not like in the US. And everyone in Israel has public insurance, and you get the same insurance. It doesn't depend what is his salary, and you pay a specific percentage of your income to the government in order to get it. And the system is that we have 4 companies, public companies, that everyone can choose and move between them, and they have clinics everywhere. And the difference between the US, that usually there are clinical practices, is that they have a headquarter that can be very organized and tell them what to do, and it's very used to transfer the medication and stuff. So very quickly, when the decision was made to bring the vaccines to Israel, the Kupat Cholim, what we call it, there was a very rapid organization. They used their own clinic to make them vaccination center. And really, like when the vaccination arrives in a few weeks, if you can, do you have the graph, Lior, that we show of the vaccinations? Like very quickly, if you can see, these are the vaccination. This is it's the percentage, but it's like if you get 2 times vaccination, so it's actually 2. So this is why it's above 100. But Israel is the red line. You can see how rapidly, like in about 1 month, almost all the non-vaccinated population needs to get his vaccination. Let's say about 50 to 60% of the Israeli population now got vaccine. And if you take out the people that recovered from the disease and the children, so actually most of the vast majority of the population of Israel is actually vaccinated. And this is really thanks to the government that brought vaccination that very quickly, but really mainly thanks to the Kupot Cholim, they did it really huge. It was amazing. Like it was everywhere, and everyone came to vaccine, and there was a lot of education about it in the media. Everyone needs to get vaccinated now, and really in a month, almost everyone got their vaccines, and this really made a huge effect in Israel. That we moved from 10,000 people a day that got the COVID-19 to about 100 today. And really, you cannot say anything. It's really thanks to the vaccine, and this make Israel like the first kind of lab, I don't know how to say it, like experimental group to try the vaccine, and the effect was amazing.
So since we have 5 minutes left, so maybe now we will leave time for questions. So the first question from Elise Silverman.
Have you had problem with anti-vaxxers in Israel, and how has it affected the progress of your vaccination distribution process? So that maybe you can.
Yes, so anti-vaccine, if we can say three major groups. The first one was in the beginning, the ultra-Orthodox group. The day there was a rumor in Israel that the vaccine affects the fertility of women and can affect pregnancies. And actually, thanks to the big rabbis of these ultra-Orthodox Jews that came and got the vaccine in front of the media, and there was really a lot of propaganda over there against this movement. And because there are a lot of cases of not a lot, there are cases of pregnant women in Israel that died during pregnancy, all of these together affected dramatically. And now these cities like Beitar Elite and Jerusalem and Modi'in Elite, they almost do not have COVID-19 right now, which is amazing. The second population is the liberal Jews, the ultra-liberal Jews. I think and this is kind of different in the US, that in the US it's more like the Republican side. Over here it's more like the very liberal, that they were afraid about Bill Gates have kind of a special device and how it will affect the Israelis in the long term. But I think that they made a lot of noise in Israel, balagan, but the percentage is still very low. And the third population is the Arab population, that they always are afraid of a conspiration of the government. And it's very difficult, although you see the young generation got the vaccination in very high rates, the Arab population do not get the vaccine.
Lauren would like to know if Israel administrating the same vaccines as the US.
I'll answer it briefly. Israel, for I guess a special agreement with Pfizer, actually use only the Pfizer vaccination right now. We have the Moderna vaccination in storage right now if we need it for later. And I think it's because of some secret agreements with Pfizer. And I really must say that even now, retrospectively, this is almost the best vaccine right now, and it goes to all these subtypes. And so I think that almost everyone in Israel got the Pfizer vaccine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got to the end. And we would like to thank to the Jewish Federation, to the JCC and the Jewish community for the place, the time and effort, especially to Holly Wolfson and Deborah Silverman, who made this come true, and to Michelle Cohen, which brought you and Oded here to Cincinnati.
And you.
At first, and
Zohar.
And us, yeah.
As family. Yeah.
And
thank you all for joining us today.
I saw all the messages about missing us, so we miss you really, really dearly. I wish we could come and do this show in real and see you all. I really, really hope that here in Israel everything is really. I hope I'm not ruining it, but everything is actually coming back to normal now, which is really great. So I hope. It will be again in the States soon, and we can actually see each other. Come and visit us in Israel. We really miss you all.
Great. Well, thank you, Oded and Zohar and Adi and Lior for this unique insight on Israel's response to COVID. I know we all learned a lot tonight, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us during Yom HaAtzmaut. So thank you also, everyone, for joining us tonight as we celebrate 73 years of Israel. We look forward to celebrating the rest of the week with you, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good evening.